Do you feel pressured to be perfect by a parent, a spouse, a loved one, a coworker, a boss? Do you feel like your push to do something perfectly is external to you? So, I'm asking you this question because I've thought a lot about it this last week. I gave a talk on perfectionism in my private Facebook group, and I was a little surprised to receive a question from somebody who said, "Well, what about if the pressure to be perfect is external to me?" And I really had to think it through. And if you're in that position, I think you'll find today's video both helpful and somewhat thought provoking. And if you do like it, I'd really appreciate if you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. So let's talk about this. We are all influenced by external factors. Of course, we are. We're influenced by our society. We're influenced by our parents, our family, how we were raised, our friend groups, where we work, right? All of these things influence us, impact our decisions. And often people close to us have expectations of us, right? And for most people who tend towards perfectionism, that was sort of trained into them young. So that's an example where it becomes highly internalized, right? But the impetus for it is external, almost all situations. And many of you watching this know that my background, I was a therapist for 20 years. So I think about things in terms of our developmental stages. And a super important developmental stage once we hit young adulthood onto middle adulthood is to fully individuate, to decide what values we will keep from how we were raised, our family, our society, and which ones maybe aren't as important to us, and how do we want to design the life we want to live. And sometimes, as we go through that individuation process, we get a lot of pressure from other people. We should be doing it differently. We should be going in a different direction with our career or our relationships, or we should be focusing more on a relationship, or we should be not focusing on relationship, focus more on career. Or, oh no, you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I know you do, not a writer or an artist. So there's all sorts of pressures, right? And then on top of that, no matter what you choose, do it super well, be perfect at it. So many of us grow up in families with those values. And I also want to throw out here, so since I am the parent of young adults who are moving towards middle age, I think most parents want their kids to be successful and happy and healthy. And they have their own frameworks that they grew up with about how to get there. So I do think that often the pressure on kids really does come from the parent wanting that child to survive. It's very innate that you want your child to do well and survive. But particularly if the parent grew up in a very different way or a different societal environment, the values and the way they think, what they think you need to do that, to survive, to succeed, to thrive, might be very different than the rest of the society you're in now. And that obviously can apply to people who immigrated to other countries, but it also could apply to people who grew up in a particularly religious environment, and then the children are growing up in a less religious environment. There's all sorts of changes that happen over the generations. And this can create a lot of conflict in families, right? But coming back to the push for perfection, because there is that sort of natural push that the parent thinks that they know how to help that child live the life that would be best for everybody, right? Which can be a problem even if the motivation is positive, right? On the unpositive side would be those parents who are way too controlling or narcissistic or want it done their way because they have more of a attitude of like, I own the child, so the child has to do what I want. But I think that is not the majority. The majority is really parents who want their kids to do well. And I'm focusing on parents here, yet this is going to be broader because really we can get pressure from a spouse or other people as well. But it often ties back to our own parents, how we were raised, and what we learned in those incredibly formative years, 0 to 10, right? That's where a lot of our emotional responses, patterns of what we see in life, it's formed during that period. So I was saying these external factors, whether it's parents or society or social group, influence our decisions. But if they have such a great influence that we end up living lives we don't want to live, that's problematic. And I want to give you a couple of tips and tools of how to think about this and how to navigate it. So, the first thing I want you to think about is really what are your values? What do you value the most, right? And if you value being perfectionistic and that's your number one, then this pressure is really coming internally, not externally. And I do have a couple of videos on that. But most likely, you're watching this because you don't feel that that's your true value. So, what is it that you do value? For example, if you want to be or push for perfection in schooling or a career, you might stay up all night working, you might work just like mad around the clock, and maybe you value your self care, you value your health, you value relationships, right? Or maybe you feel this push to be like perfect in your relationships, in which case you are presenting a perfect self to the world, hiding who you are. And you might have a real desire to not be so lonely. When we present that perfect image to the world, we're never letting people see who we really are. That's a really lonely place to be. So go through what are your values and how do you prioritize them? Because where we usually get stuck is that we have value conflicts. So you might value pleasing your parents, say, or going for a traditional career, which is valued by society and your family unit, right? So you might value that, and you might value your health, your well being, artistic pursuits, something that does not follow that path. And therefore, how do you balance those values, you in and of yourself, right? So I guess I'm trying to help you look with this one, looking internally at your values, to not so much put the focus on the external pressure you're feeling. And that's going to make a little more sense a little later, although it might be a little challenging. So, assessing your own values. Number two, what do you want your life to look like? Now, some people watching this might feel like, well, I know what I want and I just can't do it because I'm getting all this pressure, right? So, my next point's for you. But I'd say most people are probably in that stage of not really being sure, like maybe wanting this, but not really wanting to give up that. So, what is your vision for yourself? Having a vision for what you want your life to look like, knowing that fate can take us all sorts of different places, but still having that vision can be really, really helpful. Very little is accomplished by humans without some type of vision. Even before you go and you make a meal, you have the thought, I'm hungry, I think I want to have this, and then you go and you do it. So that might sound like a really dumb example, but almost everything that we manifest in a conscious way, right? We first envision it. And some people, I just want to say, because I get comments on this, some people envision things like really envision them, like picture them. Other people just know the thought, and either one is fine. So when I say you envision it, it could just be, oh, I know this is what I want. That's fine too. So, second step here, have a vision for yourself of what you want. And then the third step is to really think through if those are your values and that's your vision, why does this external pressure impact you at all? And I'm not saying it doesn't or it shouldn't. I'm just saying, why does it? Are you fearful of conflict? Are you fearful of losing the respect of somebody you care about? Are you just simply tired of being harangued that you're going in the wrong direction? Like, really, what is the problem? Because it's this investigation, really looking into the feelings you have around why it's a problem for them to pressure you, that is going to help you see that this externalized pressure is actually internalized. So, earlier when I said the thing that might be a little bit challenging or hard to hear, if you're being pressured externally to be perfect beyond your desires, if you're being pressured to take a path you don't want to take, it's really only a problem if this has become internalized. People can't really pressure us, emotionally pressure us to do things unless we have internalized some element of it or some dynamic in the relationship that allows that to happen. So, again, this is not about blaming yourself. It's not about me blaming you. It's not that at all. But it's beginning to understand, how do I have to start thinking and feeling about this differently so I can begin to do something differently, and really seeing how this pressure is somehow internalized. Now, I'm not saying that people can't be manipulative. They can't manipulate us with rewards, carrots, or sticks and punishment, right? If we don't do what they want us to do. But for the most part, in most situations, as adults, not addressing this to kids, as adults, we have the choice, right? So we may not like the choice that they're putting forth, but if they have the power to set out those requirements, like, I'm only going to pay for your graduate school if you go to medical school. Well, you may not like that, but if they have the power to say that and do it, you don't have to like it. But if you begin to see it as, okay, now on my balance sheet, right, on my little pro con list, I have to be like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to have to pay for that myself. This is what they want me to do, but they'll pay for it, which is a benefit to me. And maybe, hmm, I'll consider it. But no, actually, really, I'd rather go that route, not go that route, and pay for it myself. So let me know if this is making sense to you, because, and this is going to lead into the next point about boundaries. Because once we have acknowledged that we have internalized some dynamics around this situation where we are actually putting that pressure on ourselves in a way, right? It's sometimes hard for me to choose the exact words to make sure I'm communicating it right. But if we don't care about the whatever levers that the other person is pulling, they can't pressure us. So let's talk about this from the point of view of the boundaries, because I will guarantee that almost everybody in this situation wants the other person to change their behavior. You want your parent to stop telling you to go the doctor route instead of the artist route. You want your spouse to stop bugging you about being perfect or doing XYZ or getting involved in the community or whatever pressure they're putting on you. You want them to stop. And I get it. I understand, right? We always want other people to stop behaviors, particularly when they feel invasive, which this kind of behavior would be. It is invasive. And yeah, like ideally if there was some, judge who could be like, "Yep, you do this, you do that," they would probably be like, "You stop making that invasive behavior." But we don't have that, right? We don't have that judge. So if we begin to think about the boundaries we want to have around this for ourselves and about ourselves, we can then begin to put them into place. Now, how you do that, fairly complicated. I do have an entire course on boundaries, 8 weeks, and it covers a lot of the emotional impulses we have to not set boundaries, and then also the unrealistic expectations we might have that our boundaries will make the other person change, rather than what is it I do differently in relationship with this person to allow me to live the life I want to live, right? So this is complicated. I'm going to give you a handful of tips here. Oh, and if you are interested in that course, I will put the link here on the screen and it's also below. But how you set these boundaries is going to be tied to what your relationship is like with the person and what their ability is to be adaptable and care, right? Because if you have a mutually caring relationship with somebody and you feel they're putting too much pressure on you and you are able to express it in a way that they can hear it, there's the possibility that they might change their behavior, right? If you're able to say, look, I really feel like I am being pressured to be perfect. So if you know that 80-20 rule where, that last 20% of perfection takes 80% effort, I don't think it's worth it in many of these situations. And it's not good for my health. I'm not sleeping. I'm working too much. And if the person does care about you and they begin to understand what torture that pressure is causing you, there's a good chance they'll be able to pull back and also to broaden their sight of, my success and well being and happiness is not all about this one area, whatever that is. It could be like the marriage, the having the kids, or the career, or the this or the that, or whatever you're receiving the pressure in. Your happiness is not limited to that area, and you can have a discussion that helps the other person understand. But if the other person doesn't have flexibility of thinking, doesn't have experiences that are going to help them understand, or they have some type of personality disorder. I did a whole lot of videos, very popular topic right now about narcissistic personality disorder, but there's other personality disorders. But personality disorders in general limit the person's ability. Actually, it is their ability is limited to empathize. And in those situations, the boundaries you set might just be about what you will and won't accept. And there are ways to deflect conversations with humor. There's ways to point out the process of a discussion, like, yeah, Mom, I know this is super, super important to you. You've definitely let me know. And no, I don't want to talk about it right now. Thanks. Right? You can deflect things. You can get off the phone. You can limit visits, right? There's all sorts of ways if the other person is just not able to adapt or be empathetic towards you. So, just a quick recap, because I know this was a pretty long video, but basically, knowing your own values, knowing your vision for your life, which will incorporate perhaps some of the values that you grew up with and in your society and all of that, and maybe some other values. Understanding why the pressure is getting to you so much. Which again, I don't mean to say that as if it shouldn't, right? Like when it's family members, somebody close to you, of course it makes sense. Or if the person is holding something over your head, the boss situation, right? You're holding your job off over your head if you're not perfect. So, what is the downside to you? What choices can you make? What are the emotional processes going on for you that's making that pressure hard and holding you back from making some of those choices? Fully accepting that you have internalized some aspect of the relationship and the pressure, and then thinking through boundaries. All right, I have a lot more material on this. So check out that boundary course. Check out some of my other videos on perfectionism, boundaries. These are challenging situations. Don't want to imply that they're not. They take time to work through, but all of this will help you move towards the life you truly want to be living. All right, I'll see you next week.